I like to say that Wake is a coming-of-age story. The sequel, which is titled A Pleasant Fiction, is an unbecoming-of-middle-age story. It's a novelistic memoir, and it's probably not as much fun as Wake, in the same way that 50 isn't as much fun as 15, but it's more meaningful, in the similar kind of way.
That's such a killer line, man. An unbecoming of middle-aged story. I'm stealing that. I don't even care. That's going on a mug or a hoodie or something. And that contrast, you nailed it. Wake is messy and raw, but it's still got that restless energy. Like there's time to fix it, time to chase it, time to crash and still bounce back. But a pleasant fiction, that sounds like the aftermath. The part where you've lived through the crash, you're sweeping up the pieces and you're not sure which ones are even worth keeping. And yeah, 15's more fun than 50, but 50 knows what it means to hurt and still love anyway. That hits different.